Well, hello there, and thanks for joining me today in this, our fifth study on the topic of Bible prophecy. Over the past 4 sessions, 4 videos, we've been talking about the book of Daniel. We've studied Daniel, and today, for the first time, I'm excited because we're jumping to the New Testament, specifically to the book of Revelation. So let's do this. Let's get ready to start studying Bible prophecy. Over the past few weeks, we've been studying, of course, Introduction to Bible Prophecy, where we, went about how to study Bible prophecy. Then we jumped in and opened the book of Daniel, and for 3 sessions, we studied Daniel 2, Daniel 7, and Daniel 8. Specifically, we talked about what each of the symbols in the prophecies outlined in this book represent. Today, we're starting our study with Revelation 12. Because Revelation 12 gives us a peek behind the scenes as to what is happening behind the events, the historical events that are happening in our world that we can see and witness with our eyes. Who is behind those events? Who is behind the scenes? So we will start with Revelation 12 and then we will jump to 13 and we will make our way up. Today, we're focused on Revelation 12 and the study of what the chapter is saying, what the symbols in it represent, and who is behind the scenes working through events happening here on earth. Are you ready? I certainly am. Let's do this. Action! All right, now that we're in this setting, let's go ahead and get started. But before continuing, let's not break up tradition. Let's go ahead and do a very quick, brief recap of everything that we studied up to this point. Starting with the principles of prophetic interpretation here on the screen, we talked about how God is love and He's in control. Not in control as in He's manipulating everything, but in control as in nothing takes Him by surprise. We talked about in the first class. And then over the second, third, and fourth class, we've been discussing this slide here behind me, and basically is Daniel. We've been studying Daniel 2, Daniel 7, and Daniel 8, 3 of the most famously discussed chapters in prophecy. We interpret every single one of the symbols that appear in Daniel 2, in the statues of Nebuchadnezzar, in Daniel 7, the fourth beast, in Daniel 8, the three beasts, and most importantly, we've discussed, what these symbols mean. And we have discussed that each of these symbols, represent a kingdom, an empire, a political power, starting all the way back to the times of Babylon, and when we moved to Medo-Persia, then Greece, then Imperial Rome, which finished in the year 476 by the division because of the barbarian tribes' invasion. Romulus Augustulus was the last emperor in Rome, and from there on out, Rome was basically governmentless, just to put it in that way. Not that it really was, but the church had been building up to that point, the Roman Catholic Church. People started looking at the church for guidance, and then in the year 538, the Roman Catholic papacy finally rises up, and we discuss how that little horn that is discussed in Daniel 7 and Daniel 8 and the weird feet in Daniel 2 represents the Roman Catholic papacy. The previous video, part 4, enters into all sorts of details and discuss this in depth. So, and then we talked about did God really? All that God provided us was a brief look at history that ends up in the year 1798, which is when the Roman Catholic papacy lost power, at least the political power and influence, because of, part of the French Revolution. Napoleon Bonaparte sent General Berthier, who took the Pope captive, and then the papacy lost its standing as a theocracy, as a government that rules both the church side and the state side. Of course, the Catholic papacy has continued even to today, and this is where things gets interesting, because in Revelation, in the book of Revelation, is when we get a sneak peek, actually a full-blown description of how this power was going to come back, or is going to come back. hence making it very, very important to our discussion today and for us to, pay attention as to what's going on in the politics of the world. So today, for the first time, we actually jump to Revelation, to the book of Revelation. We're going to start in Revelation 12 because, as mentioned earlier, the Revelation 12 really gives us a sneak peek as what's going on behind the scenes. It tells us who really is in control of all of these horrible events that have happened. Remember that the little horn persecuted the woman. It persecuted God's people. It trampled on God's people. So all this horribleness has been going on, but we don't really get, we're not told just yet who is working behind the scenes for this to happen. And then Revelation 12 opens up the curtain and lets us see what's behind the scenes. So that's where we're going to start. For the next studies from here on out, we're going to study the book of Revelation. Specifically, remember that all we're trying to do is build God's prophetic time frame. So there's a lot of prophecies that are in addition to the main timeline, but we're going to be focusing on the timeline. The timeline, again, took us from Babylon. We reached all the way down to the papacy as it finished in 1798. And now what we're looking is to complete this picture, what happens after 1798, and that is when Revelation take us through. So Revelation 12, here we are. This is so exciting. Revelation 12, as I said, it takes us behind the scenes as to who's really working behind the scenes for all of these things that we're seeing with our naked eyes on our current, let's call it dimension, what's going on behind the scenes. And this is where Revelation 12 comes into play and tells us who really is working at the background of human history. Now, this is the part where I ask you that if you have not read the book of Revelation, or specifically to this discussion, the chapter of Revelation 12, you please pause this video, go read the chapter, and then come back, because it will make this discussion much easier. Just because I won't be reading the full chapter here, we're just going to go straight into decoding what Revelation 12 is trying to tell us. All right, so if you read this chapter, and I'm going to change the screen here behind me, if you read this chapter, you actually might have realized that this chapter is not linear. All these events are not happening sequentially, because when you read between the lines, it almost feels, and if it feels like that, it's because it actually is like that, that is telling a snippet of a story and then repeating that same story from a different perspective with more details, and then repeating it once again. And if I break it down here, Revelation 12, 3-4, a dragon appears and draws the stars from heaven to earth. And then 7-8, there's a conflict in heaven that leads to the banishment of the dragons and the angels to the earth, so being banished again. And then there's Revelation 13, where the dragon is cast out to earth. So clearly we see this trend that being banished, being cast out. So these are not three, different stories. This is actually the same story being repeated with three different perspectives. And of course, God is wise and has all wisdom. So there's a reason for this, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But just for now, understand that the chapter is not linear, it's not sequential. All these things are not happening one after the other. It's actually telling you the same story from multiple perspectives. It's like a flashback, as I have put here in the screen. So there's one flashback to the past, because, by the way, this event, the banishment of Satan to earth, we know that this is in the past. This was before the time of Adam and Eve, before the creation of the world. So this is something that happened, and then we get a flashback to the flashback, and then a flashback of the flashback of the flashback. Now, speaking about those flashbacks, take a minute here and let's digest, because if you read it in depth and you go and revisit, you realize that there's a conflict here. There's an enmity between the dragon and the woman, and then there's an enmity between the dragon and the woman's child. And then there's an enmity between the dragon and the woman's remnant. And I have to ask this question. Does this sound at all remotely familiar to you, this language? If you have been following this now 5-part series. Does this remind you of something that we've discussed in the past? If it does, it's clearly because we have discussed it here, or maybe you just studied the Bible. I'm going to change here my screen, and this might joggle your memory. If in Genesis 3:15, all the way back when we started, we said in part 1 that everything that has happened in history, we have to look at through the eyes of Genesis 3:15, because it's God's pronouncement against the serpent for having caused sin and introduced sin to humanity. God said to Satan, "You won this fight, but I will win the battle." And from that moment on, there's an enmity between the dragon, between the serpent and the woman, between the dragon and the remnant, and of course the child being Jesus. And we see this clearly at the Mount of Temptation, when Satan is trying to tempt Jesus and make him, of course, fail his plan. But Jesus got rid of all temptations just by quoting the word of God. Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes out of the mouth of God. Matthew 4:4. So, just reading this, and I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. This is Genesis 3:15. So obviously, now that Revelation 12 is describing enmity between woman and child, we have to keep in mind that context of Genesis 3:15. But there's a second thing. If you read this chapter has a lot of symbology, has a lot of symbols. There's a lot of things going on here. So before we move forward and actually put the story that God is trying to tell us together, we have to interpret the symbols. And of course, as we've been doing from the beginning, we have to let the Bible explain the Bible. So that's where we're going to start. Let's take a look at what the Bible says, and let's interpret these symbols in light of the Bible. So the first thing that we're going to decode is this concept of a woman. So when we read, there's a woman standing with 12 stars in her head and the sun, and what is all this means? Well, let's let the Bible interpret the Bible. And this one's actually quite easy, because God always refers to his church as a woman. He's coming as a groom to marry his bride, a woman. And of course, we know that that's not a literal woman. He meets his church. He's coming to meet us. There's evidence in the Bible for this. Jeremiah 6:2, God says, "I have likened the daughter of Zion to a lovely and delicate woman," talking about his church. You can also see Isaiah 54:5-6, Matthew 25:26. But God refers to his church as a woman. So the fact that we're seeing a woman, we can clearly interpret that this is speaking about a church, a group of people that God is calling his people, his church, okay? And then, it talks about the sun. What is the sun? Well, in Psalms 84:11, it says, "For the Lord God is a sun and a shield." So this woman is dressed. It has the sun with her. It has God. So we can say that this is God's true church. And we'll get into more details in a minute. But you can also see Revelation 1:16 to see this concept of God being called, the Son of Righteousness, Son, okay? This woman has 12 stars in her head. What are these things? So we got to remember that for some reason, God loved the number 12. There were 12 tribes of Israel, and just as Jesus came, he had 12 disciples. Many, scholars have commented about this as basically a completeness. So there were 12 tribes of Israel, which are represented by the 12 stars in her head. And we know this because God called the people of Israel his church, his elected people. God wanted to make out of Israel a powerful, holy nation. And Israel as a whole was the bride, in a sense, of course, and whoever will join Israel were more than welcome to come and accept Jesus, and they will become the bride as well. So remember that this woman is in labor. The child has not been born yet, okay? Because we know the child is Jesus, has to be the church before Jesus was born, and the church before Jesus was born was the people of Israel, the 12 tribes. So you have the 12 tribes represented by the 12 stars, and you have the woman represents the church. It's the Old Testament church, the rightful church, because it's dressed with the sun. It has God with them. It is very, very important. Actually, I'm going to read before I comment on this. In the Acts of the Apostles, Ellen White writes, as in the Old Testament, the 12 patriarchs stood as representative of Israel, so the 12 apostles stood as representatives of the gospel church. So it was a representation. Remember, in Revelation, everything, or I'm not going to say everything, but a lot of things are symbolic. So we have to be careful to not apply literal meaning to symbols. And in this case, of course, using Ellen White, using the context of the Bible, using how God refers to his own people, we know that, of course, this woman represents the true church. Now, I need to comment on this because if you continue reading Revelation, you will get to Revelation 17. And in Revelation 17, there's another woman. However, this one is not dressed with the sun. This one is dressed in pearls and jewelry and fancy dresses. And it's actually referred to as the harlot. So there's a woman dressed with the sun, the rightful church, and then there's a woman that is called or referred to as the harlot. So if the true church is supposed to be married to God, that's the rightful woman. So a woman that is a harlot, we know that, of course, a harlot sleeps with more than one man, is a church that is not married to God, that has betted, in quote unquote, symbologically speaking, it has betted another man. And we will get to this at a later point, but we have already introduced the Roman Catholic papacy, and we have discussed how church and state were always meant to be separate. And the church, the Roman Catholic papacy, preferred power over the righteousness of God, and it married, again, quote unquote, it married the kingdoms of the earth. It preferred to rule with iron fists using the power of the government instead of ruling with the love of God. So we have this rightful woman, this represented by this woman in Revelation 12, and then we have the harlot woman, which represents the Roman Catholic papacy. And again, we have not discussed this just yet, but we will later in this series. That represents the Roman Catholic papacy, a woman that did not marry God. It just, again, symbologically speaking, wedded or betted other men. And then we have the dragon. Of course, the dragon is central to this chapter, but for the dragon, we really don't need rocket science here because in the same chapter, it explains to us who the dragon is. And if you read Revelation 12:9, it says there, so the great dragon was cast out, the serpent of old, called the devil and Satan, who deceived the whole world. He was cast out to the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. So, not much to discuss here. But I will say, he says that he threw a third of the stars, and these stars represent angels. We know that Satan took angels with him when he deceived, basically, the angels into misunderstanding the character of God or misrepresenting the character of God. A third of the stars, that's a lot of angels, because in the Bible we know that there's hundreds of thousands and thousands of angels. In ancient times, the word millions wasn't a thing. So when there was a lot, they will say thousands of thousands and thousands of thousands, because the million word was not yet a thing there. So Satan took with him a third of the stars, a third of God's angels, and that's a big number. Needless to say, there's a lot of evil angels, otherwise known as demons, in this world. So beware. Stay faithful, because Satan cannot be, nor of his demons can be where Jesus is. Satan will flee at the prayer of the weakest Christians. And we're all weak. I'm not saying that, we're all weak, we're all sinful, but you know the point. When you invoke the name of Jesus, Satan just can't stand there. So pray and stay faithful, because the enemy can't get to you if God is with you. Now, let's talk about the child. There's quite a few descriptions of the child in Revelation 12, and I'm going to read some here. In Revelation 12, we read that this child came from the woman, which we know is the church. It came from the church. And of course, Jesus was a descendant through the tribe of Judah. So, and Judah, of course, is a part of Israel. So once again, we can connect the dots that the woman represents the Old Testament church. It is a male child, of course. Jesus was male. It says that it would rule all nations. It doesn't say some nations, all nations. Only one person is able to do that, God, Jesus, who came. He was caught up to God's throne. Of course, we know that's accurate from the story of the Gospels. This child also fits the sequence, the flashback where later Christ is called out directly. Remember that there's a flashback, and then there's a flashback to the flashback, and then it repeats again. So in one of those flashbacks, Christ is called out directly. So this child fits the sequence of where we would expect Christ to appear. And then, of course, Jesus' brothers and sisters are persecuted. It says that his brothers and sisters will be persecuted. Now, there's only one person, one awesome, loving person who fits all of these descriptions, and that is Jesus Christ. He was born from the church, from the woman, from the tribe of Judah. He rules with an iron fist. It's really a loving fist, but a just fist nonetheless. And it says here, right here in the description, in Revelation 12, it says, then I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, now salvation and strength and the kingdom of our God and the power of his Christ has come. For the accuser of our brethren, who accused them before our God day and night, has been cast down. And they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, and they did not love their life to the death. It talks about the Lamb, which we also know the Lamb represents Jesus. So, however, clearly Jesus obviously lived and came to show us the character of God, to help us relate to God and open a channel of communication. But there was something else. Clearly from this verse, it says that the accuser was cast down. What does this mean? Well, Jesus, aside from his mission of saving you and me from the ultimate penalty of sin, he did something else. You see, when Adam sinned, something happened, because when we go to the book of Matthew, to the Mount of Temptation, Satan utters some words that are very, very indicative of what happened back in the Garden of Eden. I am going to read here Matthew 4, 8-11, where it says, again, the devil took him up on an exceedingly high mountain. Of course, he's talking about when he took Jesus up to the mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. And he said to him, this is Satan speaking, and I want you to take note of this. All these things I will give to you if you will fall down and worship me. Then Jesus said to him, away with you, Satan, for it is written, you shall worship the Lord your God, and him only you shall serve. Then the devil left him, and behold, angels came and ministered to him. He said, I will give you these things. Can we get a little bit more resolution into what this means? Of course we can. If we go to Luke chapter 4, speaking about the same scene, it writes, the writer, and the devil said to him, all this authority I will give you and their glory, for, and this is the key word, for this has been delivered to me, and I give it to whomever I wish. Therefore, if you worship before me, all will be yours. So the question has to be asked, who gave it to Satan? Because clearly Satan is saying here that everything belongs to him, and he can give it to Jesus if Jesus worships him. So who gave it to Satan? Of course, the answer is at the Garden of Eden. God said to Adam that he had dominion over this earth and over the plants and over the animals and over everything. This is in the story of Genesis. But when Satan deceived Satan into sinning and convinced him to sin, at that point in time, that, representation standing was passed on to Satan. And we know this for a fact. We know that Satan is the accuser of, speaking of in this verse in Revelation, from heaven, because we get a clear picture of this happening in the book of Job. Okay? When we read the book of Job, and I'm going to read here Job 1, verses 6 to 12, and check this out. Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. And the Lord said to Satan, "From where do you come?" And Satan answered the Lord and said, "From going to and fro on the earth and walking back and forth on it." Note that Satan is giving the vibe that he is the representative of this earth. Let's continue. Then the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job, that there's none like him on earth, a blameless and upright man, one who fears God and shuns evil?" So Satan answered the Lord and said, Does Job fear God for nothing? Have you not made a hedge around him, around his household, and around all that he has on every side? Note this accusing tone coming out of Satan right now. Instead of saying, yeah, Job is doing good, he's accusing God of course, Job is serving you because he's well protected and he has everything he could ever want. And then let's continue here. But now stretch your hand out and touch all that he has, and he will surely curse you to your face. And the Lord said to Satan, Behold, all that he has is in your power, only do not lay a hand on his person. So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. So what is Satan doing in heaven if he was cast out? That's the question. Well, of course, Adam was to represent planet Earth when God created Earth. He was given dominion and authority over everything in this realm, let's call it the Earth. But when he sinned, Satan took that from him. And of course, when Satan is saying to Jesus at the Mount of Temptation, all of this has been given to me and I will give it to whoever I wish, is making the point that he got it from Adam and he now has that power, that standing, I guess, in the realm of the kingdoms of God. Okay? So that's what he's doing. We can think about this like there's a heavenly council and Satan is a part of it, not because he belongs there, but because he represents planet Earth. And Jesus came to take that away from Satan. Check this in the book of Desire of Ages, chapter 87. Ellen White speaks about the scene in heaven once Jesus ascended, and he says, "There is the throne, and around it the rainbow of promise. There are the cherubim and seraphim, the commanders of the angel host, the sons of God, the representatives of unfallen worlds are assembled. The heavenly council before which Lucifer, of course, Satan, had accused God and his Son, the representative of those sinless realms over which Satan had thought to establish his dominion. All are there to welcome the Redeemer. They are eager to celebrate his triumph and to glorify their King." So, of course, you can see here that there is a council in heaven, that Satan had access to this council because of what he caused Adam to do. But now that Jesus triumphed over Satan, Satan lost that standing. And now Jesus, thank God, is the representative for us. And of course, we know from the Bible that Jesus' job right now is to intercede on your behalf and on my behalf in front of the Father. So thankfully, the accuser has been cast out. Now we don't have an accuser speaking on our behalf. We have Jesus speaking on our behalf. Now there's another element here in Revelation 12, and that is the timing. There's two verses in Revelation 12 that are key to this that we're going to talk about. The first one is verse 6, and it says, "Then the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God, that they should feed her there 1,260 days." Remember that number, 1,260 days. Think about, where have we seen that number before? Again, if you have been following this series. But there's more. In verse 13 and 14, again, remember, this is a flashback to the flashback. We read the following. Verse 13 and 14 says, "Now when the dragon saw that he had been cast to the earth, he persecuted the woman who gave birth to the male child. But the woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness to her place, where she is nourished for a time, times, and half of time from the presence of the serpent." Now, if you have been following this series, where else have we seen this terminology, this time frame, time times a half of time, or 1,260 days? Well, if you remember, in the book of Daniel, specifically Daniel 7:25, we read the following. He shall speak pompous words against the Most High. He shall persecute the saints of the Most High, and shall intend to change times and law. Then the saints shall be given into his hand for a time and times and half of time. And remember that this is speaking specifically about the Roman Catholic papacy power persecuting God's people during the famous Dark Ages from the years 538 to the year 1798. Time times a half of time, we've discussed this before, is the same period as 42 months, and 42 months multiplied by 30, which is the amount of days that a month has in the Bible, is 1,260 years. So you can see that we're lifting the veil, because in Daniel, it appears that this little horn, this church, apostate church nonetheless, this Roman Catholic papacy church was just persecuting the woman for no apparent reason. But here in Revelation 12, we're taught that the dragon is after the woman. So we can see that it is Satan who is after God's people, and Satan is using the church behind the scenes to carry his work. So that's what I say. We're looking behind the scenes, behind the veil of history. It is not that the Catholics decided just to persecute God's people for no reason, but it is Satan using this system to go after the people of God. So this verse, this timing clearly links the book of Daniel and what we're seeing prophetically to the book of Revelation and what we're reading prophetically. These two are connected, and once again is one more confirmation that the women that we're seeing here represent the church. One is the rightful church of God. One is the apostate church, not the rightful church of God. And it's represented, it's not represented, it is the Roman Catholic papacy. But again, more of this later. Now, the final element that we're going to study is the mention of waters, because in Revelation 12, verses 15 to 16, we read, "So the serpent spewed water out of his mouth, like a flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away by the flood. But the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed up the flood which the dragon has spewed out of his mouth." So what is waters? Once again, we have to let the Bible interpret the Bible. And when we read a little bit ahead, Revelation 17, verse 15, it says there, "Then he said to me, the waters which you saw, where the harlot sits," again, the harlot, speaking about this apostate system, church system, "are peoples, multitudes, tongues, and nations." So the waters represent multitudes, represents people. So when it says that the dragon spewed water after the woman, we know that basically Satan unleashed the armies of the world, quote unquote, after the woman, which was what happened. Tons of people were persecuted by the help of the government systems, armies, and militant police, and all these authorities at the time. So, waters represents people, tons of people, multitudes, and nations to be precise. So now that we have studied all of the symbols, we can really put this chapter together. We can put the story together. So when we open Revelation 12, 1-6, we have this woman. She appears to be in labor. We know that this is the church. This is the time when Jesus is about to be born. And the dragon appears. There's a mini flashback to when the dragon takes a third of the stars. Is representing Satan. Back then, before sin originated. And he took a third of the angelic host with him. But then he says that this dragon was about to devour the child as soon as he was born. So he wanted to kill the child, basically. That's what devour means. And we know what happens at the birth of Jesus. If you remember from the story of the Gospels, King Herod got very upset, got jealous, and he decreed that all the newborns were to be killed. Of course, what we see with our eyes in history is that this king was jealous and just wanted to kill child for no reason. Now Revelation 12 lifts off the veil, and we see that it is Satan actually working through Herod to try and kill Jesus. But of course, God protected Jesus and he was sent to Egypt. They had to flee to Egypt. So we see here the trend that we see basically what this part of Revelation 12 is showing is the scene of Satan wanting to hurt the child, along with Satan taking a third of the angels. Then the second flashback, which is verses 7 to 12, the identity of the dragon is revealed. We're confirmed that the dragon is Satan. So once again, we have a flashback to the opening, what happened in heaven before sin began. We go back and Satan is cast out with his angels. But then we don't go back to when the child is about to be born, but we are presented with the scene when the child triumphs. And this is when Jesus emerged victorious and he joins the council that he now rightfully belongs to. Now Satan, the accuser, is no longer the representative of our domain. Now Jesus is the representative of our domain, and he is judging there rightfully. But what happens? Now Satan is cast out. Now he's really cast out, not just from heaven, but also from the council. And he is upset. So he now goes and makes war, just as Genesis 3:15 said he would. He goes to war with the descendants of this woman, basically the remnant of God's church. So everybody who has God is, God in their foreheads, he's going after them, which is basically what we have seen since the times of Jesus. The persecution of God's people has been rampant. Even to today, in certain countries it exists. And as we'll get to see next week when we study Revelation 13, it will happen everywhere, especially right here in our soil in the United States of America. But that for later. And then finally, Revelation 12 verses 13 to 17 is yet another flashback that recaps everything that we have been discussing. Satan persecuting God's people. And that is where we are as far as Revelation 12 goes. I believe that the main purpose of Revelation 12 is the main reason why God gave it to us is because we need to understand that there are stronger forces than what we see with our eyes at play in this world. It's not just that people are making bad decisions and being evil. It's that Satan knows that he has little time and he's using the powers and those who open their hearts to him to go after God's people. But again, God's people have always been protected by God. Psalms 46. God is a stronghold and he helps in times of trouble. So we should not fear this dragon or serpent named Satan. We should not fear him. He's already defeated. Now what we're looking for is to maintain ourselves, keep ourselves from falling prey to his traps and temptations, which he very much tries to attack us with day by day, and keep our eyes on God because he's already defeated and Jesus will return and he will take us back with him. That's where we are with Revelation 12. Revelation 12 is a fairly simple chapter. All of the symbols have been decoded right there on the book of Revelation. Of course, the reference that I've presented are some of the reference. There's many more. So I invite you to study this topic with me. Open the Bible, find the verses, find the symbols described in the Bible themselves. But this makes for a perfect transition for next week because now we're in this transition period between 1798, when the little horn was stopped being a little horn for a time, and now Revelation 13, where it says that this little horn was going to rise again. And that's where we are today in our periodic history. But more of that next week. Thank you for joining me today. I'm very excited to have had you here with me. Let's continue studying Bible. These topics are very important and applicable to today. And God bless you. Until next one.